Hi, Gordon here again. Welcome to the Canadian City and Southern Model Railroad. Today's little video is about staining some rocks and applying some grass and making some tufts. Well, now it's time to wash my rocks. And I don't mean clean them, I mean give them a gray wash to highlight the detail. I've got everything ready. I've got some wet water, some white glue, some static tack, and my static grass applicator already full. The static grass applicator has a needle attached to the end. The battery's fresh. I'll be using the needle because I'll be doing the cliff faces first. And the needle works better on that than trying to balance the little pad that comes with it. Behind the layout, there's a big piece of cardboard to protect the wall. So here I go. This is a mixture of stone gray and slate gray. And I've got it mixed a little bit dark. It's a very thin wash, but it's a little bit darker than I want. But that's not a problem. There's a quick solution to that. Going to come right over onto the previous module, section 1. Blending it in. Now it's a little dark, like I say, but I'm just going to hit it with some wet water. This will help it run down and not dry quite so dark. It looks a little darker now because that's just because the cliff face was already quite dry. It's been sitting a couple days now. I want to move quickly. I also don't want to get too far ahead because I'm going to let the moisture help with the next step. Now I could let this all dry, come back and get it wet again, and then add the static grass. But I'm going to do it in one step. First, I'm going to take my static tack glue . Looks like I've thinned this. There, that's more like it. I guess it had just separated a little. I'm going to hit the flat areas because that's where the grass is going to grow. I think there's enough there, but sometimes I'll come in and add a little white glue. Notice that I'm applying the glue and the static tack parallel with the strata of my rock. I don't want to get too much on the face of the rock, but a little bit will help to define the levels of strata. Now this is why I use the needle. I'm going to insert this in here, and it sticks good and it doesn't get in the way. Now I haven't turned on the static applicator because I don't want to be touching anything and get a mild shock. In the static applicator, I have a combination of Harvest Gold and a Spring Green and a straw color. And as always, seems to not go as far as you think it will. Turn off the static applicator. Turning the static applicator back on, and I've added a little more green to the Harvest Gold and the Wild Honey mixture. Turn that back off. Now I'm going to add some fine ground foam, and this is blended turf. I really like this color, but it is a ground foam, and I'd rather use a static grass, but I'm out of the Spring Green. And I don't remember where I got it right now. I'll find some more later. I can always add more of this at any time. I'm going to try not to get any inside what'll be the spring area where the pond comes from. Natural springs. I used to use this blended turf very heavily, but with the static grass that I'm using now, I use it quite sparingly. It kind of brings out a little color. Some of the static grasses to me look a little bit light in color, a little bit too grayish. Well, that's that area. Applicator before removing the needle that's stuck. Okay. I wish Woodland Scenics would make a static grass that's the same color as their blended turf, or the same colors I should say. It's a nice brighter green. It lasts a long time on a layout before it fades, and it's just a color I like. I think it looks quite natural. I'm going to put a little bit of that, especially along the ditches where there's more moisture. sometime later, I will come back and add some fall colors to all of this. But I want my layout to represent a year when there's been plenty of moisture, so the grass isn't just all straw colored in the fall, which it often is in this area. Now I've got some medium green, medium ground foam, which I'm going to apply, let it fall down the hill naturally, and collect in areas where bushes would naturally grow because the moisture is there for them, particularly along the drainage ditches. Now much of this won't stick. That's okay, I'll just suck it up with the vacuum before I run some trains after everything's dry enough. I'll put a dab of white glue on some of these areas that I just sprinkled so that they don't all just suck up with the vacuum later on. One final little hit of wet water to help the glue settle in and to help the ground foam settle down. Now I'll move on to the last little section of the cliff face. Then I'll do all these level areas in here. I've added the last little bit of brighter green that I have to my applicator. And I'm going to add the last bit of grass here. You'll note that the little attachment is sitting on either side of the track, straddling the track, so that I get contact to the wet scenery on both sides of the track here as it goes over a little bit. Now I'm going to turn stuff off and move it over to this flatter area. Now this is the area that will eventually, once I build it, have the sawmill. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and put some grass down here. If I don't run out too soon. Because it can be easily sanded off to bare dirt again once the building is done. And it's ready to go in place. Turn things off, move to the front section here. Well, I'm out of this material now, but much of this will get done with ground foam and with Tufts, which I'll get to next. I have here some Tufts. These particular Tufts are commercial tufts. They were made by Silfler. I think they're some of the best scenic materials out there. And here's some more that I've made. They're also made with the Silfler static grass, but I actually made the tufts a day ago, and now they've dried to where I can utilize them. So how did I do it? I have here some tuft tack. It's from Woodland Scenics. And I'm going to apply a few drops here on this sheet. Now this sheet is parchment paper that I got from the grocery store. And I'm going to try something a little bit different today. I'm going to try to make some rings. They may not always work because the surface tension of the static tack might draw them apart. But I'm trying to leave the middle without so much material as I draw little donuts. This is Eileen's, I guess, tacky glue. It's basically the same kind of stuff. You can get it at most craft stores. You may wonder why I'm leaving the middle of these areas open. We'll get to that here in a minute. Now I've loaded up my applicator with some fine, fairly dark green static grass. And I'm coming pretty close to my work here. And that's all there is to that. Here I've got some long strands of fibers that is sold by Woodland Scenics for doing tall reeds and stuff. And I'm going to cut a little bit off. Going to grip it up closer so I get a better tight fit. And I'm going to cut a little bit off. And that's going to leave me with some static compatible dry grass between 2 and 4 feet tall, in scale of course. Here's the tufts that I did the other day. The glue's good and dry now. And in the middle of these, at least the ones where the donut shape came out good, I'm going to add another little dot of tacky glue. Now with those straw colored that I cut, and there was quite a bit more loaded into the applicator than what I showed you cutting, I'm going to come back over this. And dust off the excess. When I mix my plaster and paint mixture, sometimes I'll let the little bit dry that I don't end up using right away. And once it's dry, I collect it. Also, I sometimes mix up a batch of earth tone colors with plaster and spread them out on a thin sheet of plastic like a garbage bag. Let them dry thoroughly and then crumble them up and store them. Now I'm getting pretty low, but I still have a fair amount left over from my previous layouts and various module projects. So here I have some raw sienna mixed with plaster. I also have burnt umber, raw umber, yellow ochre, red ochre, etc. And I keep it stored in bins like this. But to get fine dirt, remember, for HO scale, your dirt needs to be 87 times smaller than real dirt. So I'm going to take a little bit of this and put it in a mortar and pestle. And grind it into a powder. You can also do this by putting it between two boards and mashing it, rubbing it around and crushing it up. But you can sometimes get a little bit of sawdust doing that. Now I'm going to pour it into a fine sifter. And I'm going to sift it into a separate container so that only the finest powder is in this container. It's the same basic material, just ground into a powder. Now I've got a bunch of rocks and gravel of the same color. And like I say, I've got quite a few colors of these, all based on earth tones. Now the paint I use to mix with the plaster can be regular house paint, like I've used on my fascia boards and most of my scenery so far. But it can also be earth tones for using with types of painting. For example, craft paints, and also specialty paints for latex painting, similar to oil paints, but oil paints won't mix well with the plaster. But the latex paints that are similar to that mix just fine. And they're quite strong in pigment, so you can make a lot of soil without a whole lot of paint. Now I've got some fine soil. And I'll use it when I show how to plant my tufts. Section 1 and Section 5 have been blended a bit better with a little bit of help from my tufts. And the canyon rock faces have been cleaned up a little bit. Now here in the canyon, you may notice there's no footings whatsoever for any of the bridges that will cross it. That's because the canyon's been there for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years before the bridges. So the bridges have to be built to the canyon, not the other way around. Now yesterday my camera ran out of juice before I finished the last little segment. But now that that segment is finished, I can't show a video of it in process. So I'm going to work over here in this corner and do a little bit of work here on the stream bed for the Veramaho River. First off, I'm going to get just a little bit of damp with wet water. You'll notice that I've taped off the edges to keep water and glue and soil from running off onto the floor. Then I'm going to put just down a little bit of white glue here in the stream bed. Now I'm going to add a few little river rocks. Those were raw umber. And a couple raw sienna. That one's a little big, get rid of it. Tiny pinch of yellow ochre. and a little bit of red oxide. Now I'm going to add a little soil. Going to start with the raw umber. And again, this is paint mixed with plaster and crushed up. And a tiny little bit kind of along the sides of the yellow ochre for sand. A little bit of raw sienna, which is the main color of the layout. And finally, just a little pinch of red oxide. Now, these are some of the larger homemade tufts that I did the other day that are now dry enough to apply. Now these are a little taller than some of the tufts I was using yesterday, which makes them ideal for along the edge of the stream bed. And I'm using the tweezers to kind of get under the edge so they don't get too deformed as I peel them off the backing. Now I'll apply some of the smaller tufts up the side of this hill. I'll go sparingly here because all this area will need to be better blended into section 4 when its scenery is completed. Now just a little bit of the raw umber soil kind of around the edges of the tufts. So that the edges of the glue surface on the bottom doesn't show as much. And now, just so that the soil doesn't stick up on top of the grass, because the grass is growing out of the soil and not the other way around, I'm going to hit this little area pretty good with wet water. And there it is. Well, thanks for watching, and have a really great day, or an evening, whatever. See you next time.